Hi everyone. I'm Avarie Kim. I'm a senior here at Oaks Christian School, future Yukon Husky, and aspiring neurologist. And I'm excited to share with you my senior capstone project, which revolves around epileptology. So, what is epileptology? It is the professional medical specialty that deals with the diagnosis, treatment, and management of epilepsy. It is a subspecialty of neurology, which is the study of the nervous system, aka the brain and spinal cord. And tonight we are going to explore epileptology science, its impact on human lives, and its role in research, medicine, and advocacy. Now, before we get into epileptology, let's define the disease. But before we do that, I have a question for you guys. What first comes to mind when you hear the word epilepsy? Maybe just hear a couple shout-outs.
Seizures.
Anything else?
Flashing lights.
Exactly. Okay, so common assumptions are flashing lights and strobes, or seizures, specifically like intense shaking on the floor. And this is completely valid because this is how it's usually depicted in TV shows and movies and social buzz. But the truth is that's only part of the picture. So let me establish a definition. So epilepsy is a neurological disorder that causes recurring seizures. And interestingly enough, only 3% of cases are actually caused by flashing lights. So rave parties aren't the only villain here. Epileptic seizures form a spectrum of diverse characteristics that differ from person to person. So now we have an established definition of epilepsy, but what does this look like in the biochemistry of the human brain? Let's take a look into the inner mechanics of seizures. This is a neuron, or a brain cell. And by people who've taken AP Psych or anatomy, I know you're super excited to see this. Basically, as you can tell by its shape, your neuron's job is to pass information from one neuron to another in a communicative process called an action potential. Basically, information comes in through these dendrites, these bushy extensions up here on the left, travels down the axon, that spiny structure in the middle, and then exits back through the synaptic end bulbs to jump onto the next neuron, and so on. And clearly, neurons are very complex cells with clearly very intricate structures and functions. These are only a few of the structures that neurons have. So our brain can't have two massive in the mouth of them, right? Well, here is what neurons look like in just a microscopic portion of your brain. This is an enhanced image. Can anyone give any guesses of how many neurons we have in our brain? Ballpark? Okay, there we go. We have 86 billion neurons in our brain. And actually, we have 100 trillion connections in between them. So your neurons are always at work and always completing these action potentials. This explains why you can scroll on TikTok, eat Takis, and avoid all your responsibilities all at the same time. Action potentials don't just happen when you're consciously thinking and learning. They can happen when your hormones are signaling each other to carry out subconscious bodily functions like digestion and heartbeat. And what am I getting at here? Why does this have anything to do with seizures? Well, because this is all electrical transmission. Your brain is full of electrical activity, and all these neurons communicating with one another is all electrical transmission. And seizures occur when this electrical activity gets out of hand. So basically, these action potentials, as you can see in the first animation provided, a seizure occurs when these action potentials happen way too fast and there are uncontrolled bursts of it. And the second animation on the right shows it on a larger scale. The bursts can occur in a specific region of the brain called a focal seizure, or throughout the entire brain called a generalized seizure. So looking at the second diagram, does this look like a focal or generalized seizure to you? Okay, awesome, generalized. Glad you're still here with me. All right, so let's take away the microscope and look at things on a larger scale. what does an epileptic seizure look like to the naked eye? As I said earlier, seizures are a spectrum of very different signs and symptoms, and 4 of them are listed here. First are convulsions, the ones that we usually know and recognize. It's rapid and involuntary muscle contractions. And the next one is actually just staring into space. And this is actually even more common than convulsions. And next are stiffening or rigidity of muscles. And another one is bladder failure, because when your brain signals to, quote, hold it in are disrupted, your bladder muscles may tense and relax. And doctors use these signs and symptoms to classify seizures into 6 generalized types. First are automatisms, and these ones are usually in children, and these are the ones that are characterized by staring into space. They can last just 3 to 15 seconds, sometimes accompanied by small twitching in the eyes or lips, and they can occur in clusters, meaning they can happen up to hundreds of times a day. Next are atonic seizures or drop attacks. And this occurs when people lose muscle control, causing them to drop on the ground, and they usually lay unconscious for about under 15 seconds. Clonic seizures are characterized by jerking, repeated and rhythmic jerking movements in the muscles, while tonic seizures, on the other hand, are caused by stiffening of the muscles. And tonic-clonic seizures are the ones that you usually see on hospital dramas. It's basically somebody loses consciousness, and then they go into a tonic stage where their muscles stiffen, and then a clonic stage where their muscles start jerking. And last are myoclonic seizures, which are actually really interesting because while they happen, the person is still fully awake and conscious. The muscles are just briefly twitching and jerking. So an example of this in daily life would be if somebody is playing video games or icing a cake or typing, doing some cognitively taxing activity with their hands, they may find that their hands are moving back like that. Now, if you exhibit any of these signs and symptoms, what are the next steps for you in terms of diagnosis and treatment? The first diagnostic technique for epilepsy is history taking, as usual. A neurologist will question your general health as well as your seizure patterns and frequencies. More specifically, the requirements for an epilepsy diagnosis are 2 or more unprovoked seizures or 1 seizure with a high risk of occurrence. For example, if you've only had one but you have a family history of the disorder, you may be eligible for a diagnosis. And another one is an EEG. And this is a non-invasive routine exam that all patients have to take, where these small metal discs called electrodes are placed onto your scalp and your brainwaves are recorded. And after the recording, the neurologist will interpret your brainwaves and check for any abnormalities that may indicate that you are eligible for a diagnosis. Another one is radiologic testing, like MRI and PET scans, etc. The purpose for these ones are to show scars, lesions, tumors, any physical irregularities in brain tissue that may be the cause for seizures. And lastly, are neuropsych tests. These specifically test for memory or language issues to help doctors locate the area of the brain that may be causing seizures. For example, if somebody is doing neuropsychological assessments and they're showing very poor memory performance, their seizures may be originating in the hippocampus region of their brain. Now, there are 2 main treatment options for seizure disorders. The first is anti-seizure medicine. This is shown to completely eliminate or decrease severity of seizures in the vast majority of patients. There are over 20 types, but prescription to which one depends on your age, severity, gender, etc. And in the rare case that this doesn't work, surgery is the next option, where a surgeon will remove the area of your brain that is causing seizures. For example, if you have temporal lobe epilepsy, you may get a temporal lobectomy. Or there is a popular or well-known surgery called a corpus callosotomy, where a surgeon will cut the fibers that that connect the 2 hemispheres of your brain to prevent seizures from spreading. Now let's shift to look at epileptology's role in the public and professional worlds. The most important career in epileptology is an epileptologist, someone who diagnoses and treats the disorder. So here is how to become one. First, you're going to need a 4-year bachelor's degree. It really doesn't matter what you study, but you're going to need a lot of laboratory experience and foundational scientific knowledge. Then you spend another 4 years in medical school. This is a rigorous period where you pass the licensing exam to become a doctor. Every doctor experiences these 2 steps, but if you want to become a neurologist, you move on to the 3rd step, which is 4 more years in a neurology residency program, where you receive special training on how to treat neurological disorders. And then lastly, if you want to be an epileptologist, you do a final 2 years in an epileptology fellowship. The first year is epilepsy training, and the second is advanced laboratory research. And by the end of this process, you'll know everything about the brain and probably forget what sleep feels like. But nevertheless, an epileptologist is a rewarding career that has a lot of meaningful impact. Now, epileptology continues to expand in research and cutting-edge technology. One such research effort is identifying genetic mutations that cause epilepsy. For example, some individuals with Dravet syndrome, a type of infantile epilepsy, have a mutation in the SCN1A gene, which affects neural sodium channels. And basically, researchers have been able to take the skin cells of people with Dravet syndrome, convert those into brain cells, measure the electrical activity of those brain cells, and use it to find the cause of Dravet syndrome. Another effort is biomarkers of epileptogenesis. In simpler terms, researchers are finding a potential opportunity to detect the onset or genesis of somebody's epilepsy and preventing it from occurring. Specifically, people are creating implantable microelectrodes that can take really detailed recordings of your brainwaves, and this identifies people at risk for developing epilepsy and being able to prevent it. Next is a similar innovation that involves deep brain stimulation. Scientists are also making implantable devices that can detect an oncoming seizure and prevent it from happening in the first place by administering a fast-acting treatment such as an electrical shock or a fast-release medicine. And lastly, researchers are testing a new cell therapy called transfection. In this process, transfection introduces viruses to brain cells, and these brain cells then act as factories to produce potentially therapeutic proteins. And you may be thinking, I don't know what language she just spoke, but the truth is, in order to be involved in this research aspect of epileptology, you need to have a lot of neuroscientific expertise and years of academic and laboratory training. But the truth is that in order to make an impact, you do not need any educational background. And that is where advocacy comes in. Organizations such as the Epilepsy Foundation and Epilepsy Alliance America take a variety of efforts to encourage reform and support regarding the disease. Firstly, they aim to increase education and awareness, specifically aiming to increase knowledge in the general public. Not only do advocates want to destigmatize seizures, they want to educate the public on important topics like seizure response protocol. Secondly, there are advocacy efforts that fight public policy. They shoot for legislative reform to improve affordable healthcare treatment for epileptics, as well as fight discrimination against them in areas such as housing and employment. And lastly, many advocates make an impact by fundraising money for new biomedical innovations and research treatments to further understand causes, outcomes, and possible cures for the disease. To wrap up, epilepsy is a very complex condition that still unfortunately carries many misconceptions. And therefore, it is much needed that there is more awareness and support to destigmatize seizures and improve the lives of patients. Secondly, although it's a medical specialty, Epilepsy is an expanding network of clinicians, scientists, and communities of all different expertises and levels of experience working together to understand disorders better. And lastly, due to advances in research and innovation, the future for epilepsy patients, including me, is brighter than ever. And there's still so much more to learn about epileptology, but I hope you have enjoyed scratching the surface with me. Thank you so much for listening.
Good job, Avery. Thank you very much. Your passion for the topic was clearly evident, and I can imagine you maybe following those paths that you showed there, and one day having a great impact for people with epilepsy and helping continue to further the frontier there. I'm going to invite Chris Holler,